Todd, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. It was a wild weekend. I never thought we would get to the point where we had a scene like we had in Philly. It was unbelievable. The turnout, the crowd, the passion, the boos, the roars. I mean, it was 11:30 on Friday night, and the place had about 20,000 people packed in it. It was really an unbelievable scene.
But do you think that we're going? Is this the new norm here with the NFL with the draft, that we're going to have this traveling road show, the NFL version of Coachella?
No question. I mean, according to a report, there were 14 teams that sent their events and marketing groups to Philly just to see how they did it and how to execute it, and then eventually to pitch to the NFL for getting the draft in their city. So I've heard speculation about Texas next year, and then some people said maybe Inner Harbor, Baltimore. So I'm not sure where it'll be next year. We'll see. In Philly, there's a chance they could get it again, like Chicago had for 2 years after the long run in New York. But there's no question that it has turned into such a wild event and a 3-day event that other cities are sitting there saying, why not us? We might as well, let's put in a bid and see if we can get it and capitalize.
But do we need to have a draft pick from outer space and an orangutan? And
that was a little bit much.
Okay, but this is your moment of being drafted, and it's a damn orangutan who's making the pick here. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I didn't really know. I didn't know about that until after the draft. But yeah, listen, I like the crowds. I like having it outdoors. I like having a city there and involved and owning it for a year or two. The other stuff you can take it or leave it. I would prefer to. I don't see why we need to make picks with orangutans and outer space. To me, I don't know. So I'm all good with it.
I wanted to ask you about McCaffrey and Fournette didn't play in bowl games, and at the time it was controversial. It didn't hurt their draft status. Jake Butt, the Michigan tight end, got injured in their bowl game. But where do you think we're going to be headed when it comes to bowl games? When it comes to what is a big bowl game? What do I need to play in? And star players just saying, you know what, it's a secondary bowl game. I'm just not going to risk it.
Well, there were over, I think, 3,000 people or 3,000 players in bowl games last year, and only, I guess, 3 if you count Shock Linwood. Only 3 wound up sitting out, basically for preparations to preserve their body. I mean, ultimately for the NFL draft. I do think we'll see an increased number moving forward. I would be surprised if it wasn't. I'm not saying that it's great for college football. It's not. I understand it, but I think you have to keep perspective on this. If you're a young man, no matter what your background is, whether you come from money or no money, you're staring at, in the case of Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, over $20 million in guaranteed money, and from a rookie contract. And you've gotten to the point playing for LSU, playing for Stanford, teams that normally are playing in college football playoffs, and if not, then maybe it's an Orange Bowl in a year where they're not hosting, or a Rose Bowl in McCaffrey's situation. So if you're not playing in one of those bowls, it's been somewhat of a disappointing year. You've given everything you have, and you've been a bell cow back, and you really have nothing left to gain. I understand it. I really do. I'm not promoting it, but I understand it, and I can't think of one reason why you would get on their case. And now it proves to future players that this is an option if you're not playing in one of the big bowls, and if you are going to be a top pick.
Well, I can't imagine a quarterback doing this. I think we'd view it differently with a quarterback. If Sam Darnold all of a sudden said, I'm not going to play in the Sun Bowl next year, I think that scouts and GMs and coaches would have an issue with it, and I'd understand it. McCaffrey and Fournette, if you're loading them up with 300 touches a year, I get it, because all it takes is one little nick, and you could be costing yourself pretty significantly. We're talking to Todd McShay, ESPN NFL Draft Analyst. One high-level NFL executive said that the Bears GM, Ryan Pace, just got fired with this draft. What do you make of that comment?
I think that's overly aggressive. I think probably took it a little too far there. Listen, I think Ryan Pace, if you sat with him in a room and were honest and got him to be honest, he would admit that they gave up too much. But I also think 5 years from now, if Mitch Trubisky is developed properly and he becomes a good starting quarterback for that city, for the next decade, who cares what they gave up? That's the only position where I would trade up for, and I would be willing to give more than market value. Ordinarily, I think trading back and acquiring more picks, because it isn't an exact science, and you want, the more picks you have, the better chance you have of hitting. But to me, with this situation specifically, Trubisky was the best quarterback in terms of pro potential in this draft. They last year, remember, and I know from talking to people who were in their draft room that there was a lot of discussion about maybe moving up for Carson Wentz, and they wound up Pace saying, you know what, let's wait, let's see if we can get a better deal, or wait to see if he falls to us, and it didn't happen. And I think, with a full year of maybe kicking yourself and wanting to go back and maybe change the aggressiveness in which you played that situation, I think he made a mental decision. You know what? Whatever it takes, I'm getting the number 2. I'm not going to let any other team have any opportunity to move up, and we're going to go get our guy. Now, Mike Glennon can't be thrilled. He's been waiting and finally gets his shot to be a starter, but that's the business. And I think for Mike Glennon, it becomes now a one-year audition, and I think this is a good situation for Trubisky, who only had the 13 starts in college. He gets to go in, learn from a guy who's, and Glennon sit behind him and go in the quarterback room and learn what it takes to be a professional quarterback and not have the pressure necessarily right away unless there's an injury to Glennon.
I get the feeling, though, if the Chicago Bears didn't move up to get a quarterback and they stayed where they were and they took Deshaun Watson, who everybody knows, everybody saw him play, win a national championship, we don't know anything about Mitchell Trubisky. So the fear of the unknown, I think if Bears fans knew that you were taking Deshaun Watson, they might have been better with Deshaun Watson because they know who he is as opposed to Mitchell Trubisky.
Yeah, maybe the Bears fans would be, but I would rather have Trubisky. If you were going to give me the option, I'd rather have Trubisky, and I know it cost me. But the thing that gets overlooked too is Pace wound up moving back and recovering some of the picks too. He didn't recover everything, but he did some maneuvering to recover some picks as well. So they wound up getting Adam Shaheen, who I think is a very underrated tight end and can be a weapon for Trubisky for the next several years, and Eddie Jackson, the safety, was a nice pick as well. So overall, I don't have a problem with what they did. I don't have a problem with any of those 3 teams, which, by the way, set a record. It's the first time we've ever seen in NFL draft history 3 teams in the first round move up for a quarterback. I don't have a problem with it because it's that position. I think Deshaun Watson there's a transition that has to be made. I love his intangibles. The fact that he played his best in the biggest moments, and I think his leadership, how humble he is, how hardworking he is, I think he's going to find a way to succeed in the league, but he's got a big transition to make. But, with Mahomes, he's in the perfect spot as well. He really is. I can't think of an organization in the league, in a situation in the league, that would be better for Pat Mahomes, who is the biggest project I can remember, but may have the best skill set of a project quarterback we've seen drafted in the first round in years. And so, to me, going to Andy Reid, who legitimately knows how to develop quarterbacks, and being able to sit behind Alex Smith, he could not have picked a better spot.
The Buffalo Bills fire their entire front office after the draft. Is that strange? Does that feel strange?
Very strange.
Yeah, because you're not good enough to keep the job long term, but could you stay for the most important weekend in our franchise here? It's the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are other instances where this has occurred. I can't remember something this quickly and this harsh. So I thought they had a great draft, and maybe it's because they were different decision makers this year, but I thought they had one of the best drafts that they've had in years. I thought Tre'Davious White was a steal where they got him. He's going to be a starting corner. Zay Jones is going to be an impact wide receiver, and that's a huge need for that organization. They just keep missing on wide receivers. Deion Dawkins out of Temple is a plug-and-play starter at guard. So, and then Nate Peterman. I think he's the most pro-ready quarterback in this class. He does not have a big arm, but he has everything else. And so he's got to develop the arm strength, which is something you can do over time. Tom Brady's arm is a lot stronger the last 5 years than it was, coming out of Michigan. So if he can do that, he's got a chance to be a surprise pick from this group. And if nothing else, you get a really good backup in Peterman. So I thought they had a really good draft. I don't know the dynamics of, how it went down and if they knew before the draft that they were going to wind up being fired or not. But it definitely was strange and something that caught me a little off guard.
Joe Mixon, Caleb Brantley, Reuben Foster, Chad Kelly, Garyon Conley, Dede Westbrook. What does it take to not get drafted anymore?
It's a good question. It is a good question. It would be hard to go home to my wife and see my mom and see my little daughter and say, hey, this is the guy we drafted in the second round.
Yeah.
It would be really difficult, and most teams agree with that, and most teams I talked to had him off the board. Joe Mixon off their board, and Caleb Brantley was off a lot of teams' boards because of what he did. He knocked a woman's tooth out by punching her in the face, so allegedly, I guess. So, listen, I agree. Dede Westbrook is the only player I've ever heard of who's kicked out of a 15-minute interview at the Combine. I mean, if you can't last 15 minutes in an interview, and with all the other stuff he's done, but we see it every year, and it's just the nature of the beast. And some teams are willing to take chances, and we'll see how it works out long term.
Do you have your number one pick next year already?
Oh, jeez.
Come on, let's get started here.
I mean, the absolute worst assignment I have all year long is in 3 days I've got to do a stinking 2018 mock draft.
Yeah.
And I haven't watched a minute of tape on these guys. So, Sam Darnold, I covered 2 of his games live this year and have seen enough out of USC to think he's if he continues on this track, he can be a number 1 overall pick or top 5 pick next year. The guy I actually covered in his conference championship game, was Josh Allen from Wyoming.
Yep.
And spoke to him about the process. He was thinking about coming out. I'm glad he went back to school. He may be the most physically gifted quarterback to come out in 5 years. He's got to learn how to make better decisions and be a little bit more consistent with his accuracy. But I think he could be a surprise. A Wyoming quarterback who was not very highly recruited out of high school could wind up being, the number 1 overall pick or a top 5 pick next year.
Look at you with a hot take. Hot take for 2018. You're learning this business now there, Todd. Hey, great job. Great job this weekend. You and Mel putting in a lot of hours there.
I appreciate it, man.
Certainly paid off.
Thank you very much.
Take a deep breath, and we'll wait for that mock draft.
Right, anxiously.
Thank you, Todd. Todd needs a nap. Todd McShay of the Mothership.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.